Slava Ukraini. Hello to everyone. I see that we are getting more and more people into our today evening conversation. Let's take maybe just a couple of seconds while everybody gets connected, and so that we can start the discussion with very distinguished guests today. Maybe I start with the introduction. I will start maybe with introduction of myself, because I don't know, since we're a big group, I don't know if I know everyone, everybody knows me. I'm founding dean of the business school and vice rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University. It was very difficult month for the whole country. It's, I would say, I'm always thinking that maybe this is like really, really difficult and bad dream, which makes you really tired, and then somebody will wake you up. But it looks like that it's not, unfortunately. But at the same time, such thing as community is very, very important in such situations. So I'm really glad that community of business school at the Ukrainian Catholic University is together. I'm really glad that despite of difficult situation and of war, it's not difficult situation, it's war. We still care about our learning and development. I think it means that our country has hope, and we all have this hope in our hearts, and it means that all of us understand that our role will be very important, not only in defending the country, but also in rebuilding the country. And maybe this is how I would like to build the conversation with our guest, Rita McGrath, today. I will start maybe with unofficial presentation of you, Rita. We met in 2014. It was very similar moment, because at that time, actually the war just started and Crimea was annexed. And I was at that time in the United States, pulling together the program for public servants whom we wanted to get prepared very quickly in our university. And this is how we met at that time. And though the situation is not good now, I'm glad that you're able to talk today to our group and to share your thoughts. And Rita is professor of Columbia University. She's in top 5 business thinkers, ranked by Thinkers 50. And she's author of many books. At the End of Competitive Advantage is one of those which we read very attentively in the business school by our team. I know you constantly generate very interesting content, and probably I would like to stop here, and keep it very informal, and as informal but warm welcome to you. The floor is yours. So I think we will take about 15-20 minutes for your introduction and to some thoughts, and then I will be taking some questions from the chat. And I also kindly ask our participants, when you write the question, if you can write 2 lines, maybe who are you, executive, business owner, and maybe 1 line, what you do now except for the business, because I know that all of you are volunteering, all of you are helping the army on different fronts. So if you would write, it would give also to Rita some understanding, also how our life looks like for business and executives in Ukraine. So Rita, I would turn the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I remember our first meeting very well. And at the time, you were really trying to create a sea change in the way things were done in Ukraine. And it's not easy. You've got this overhang of so many institutions and so many older ways of doing things. So it was a great honor to be involved then. It's a great honor to be with you now. I'm sorry for the circumstances that have brought us together, but if this is helpful at all, I would be glad to know that. So what I thought would be useful would be to reflect a little bit on what is the purpose of strategy in an environment which seems so incomprehensible, which seems so difficult, and then some ideas about what leaders need to be doing in these very unpredictable and uncertain times. How do you plan? How do you think forward when there's just so much that's unknown, and perhaps work together to come up with some ideas. So I'll share my screen, which hopefully you can see. So what I'd like to start with is a story, and it's a story from World War I, and it goes something like this. It was a story that was told by Albert Szent-Györgyi. A small group of Hungarian troops were camped in the Alps during the First World War. Their commander, a young lieutenant, decided to send out a small group of men on a scouting mission. Shortly after the scouting group left, it began to snow, and it snowed steadily for 2 days. The scouting squad did not return, and the young officer, something of an intellectual and an idealist, suffered a paroxysm of guilt over having sent his men to their death. In his torment, he questioned not only his decision to send out the scouting mission, but also the war itself and his own role in it. Suddenly, unexpectedly, on the third day, the long overdue scouting squad returned. There was great joy, great relief in the camp, and the young commander questioned his men eagerly. "Where were you?" he asked. "How did you survive? How did you find your way back?" The sergeant who had led the scouts explained, "We were lost in the snow and we had given up hope. We had resigned ourselves to die. Then one of the men found a map in his pocket. With its help, we knew we could find our way back. We made camp, waited for the snow to stop, and then as soon as we could travel, we returned here." The young commander asked to see this wonderful map. It was a map not of the Alps, but of the Pyrenees. The moral of the story: when you are lost, any map will do. And this, I think, to me, is one of the core ideas behind why strategy is helpful, even when things are uncertain. It calms people down, it gets them moving in a direction. And as they're beginning to move, they're beginning to learn. And it can help us uncover new information faster. It can help us adjust as we need to see the situation unfolding. So I am a passionate believer in strategy being the sort of overarching method that allows you to do things that are perhaps different, that are unusual than you might have done. And so a lot of my work has to do with planning, but planning under uncertainty. And I think what you want strategically is clarity around these 4 things. So the first thing is, what's our purpose? What are we trying to achieve here and now, medium term, ideally longer term? What is that core purpose that's motivating us? What does the end state look like? What does success look like when we get to where we're finally going? What methods are we going to use? And the way that I would think about that is, what would have to be true for us to be successful? And lastly, how are we dealing with risk? And the way I would think about dealing with risk is planning, but planning through a series of small checkpoints, which over time can add up to something that is quite substantial. So this thinking, I have to acknowledge my friend Tom Kolbitz, who is a former brigadier general in the United States Army, and he wrote a wonderful book called In Extremis Leadership. And what the book's about is, how do we lead people when lives are at risk, fortunes are at risk, the stakes are very high. And unlike what the movies might tell us, what he found was that these leaders are very intentional about keeping the emotional temperature at a state that allows us to kind of clear our minds and move forward. So just like the scouting party in the First World War, having some kind of guide that we can grasp helps us to move forward. Now, once we're in motion, there are some things that I think are quite different about strategy today than perhaps we would have read in a textbook from 30 or 40 years ago. So I think the first difference is that we used to think of stability as the normal thing and change as the unusual thing. That sounds crazy to say given the current situation, but I think we need to be mentally moving more towards a model where change is the normal thing and stability is the unusual thing, because it allows us to be better prepared. You can think of it as being in motion. If you're already in motion and you wanted to run somewhere, right? It's easier than if you're in a standing state. A second theme that's really different, I think, about strategy today, and this is going to be very important as Ukraine rebuilds, which I hope will happen sooner rather than later, is we have to decide what we're going to let go of. You know, what are the things we're going to disengage from so that we can clear the room for the future? What are the things we're going to stop? A third element has to do with resources. And we're all coping now with scarce resources. So how do we make sure that the resources we do have are mapped against our best opportunities rather than being locked into the past? Then I think innovation is, right now, we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation that I think it's going to be even more important in the future, because that's where the new growth opportunities, the new development opportunities are going to come from. Leadership, and I'll spend a little more time on this, but you know, we have this mind of leaders, you know, up on a horse saying, follow me. And yet I think what the current situation and others have shown us is increasingly we need leaders who are creating somebody muted me. Anyway, leaders who can get the information that they need to really take action in the here and now. And I think how we spend our careers are going to be very different. We're increasingly in a world where the question is not what's my next step up a ladder, but what's my next tour of duty? You know, what's my next learning situation that I'm going to be engaged in so that I can, in fact, move toward the future in a constructive way. So let's talk a little bit about what leaders need to do in these very extreme circumstances. And the overall idea that I would have is one of the things a leader really helps people with is absorbing uncertainty. Telling people, you know, quietly, not, you know, reducing the emotional temperature, telling people what the reality is, getting people focused on something other than themselves. And this comes from Tom Kolditz's work. So the kinds of things that you can do are spell out for people. I don't know what next week is going to hold, but for now, here's what you can assume, right? Assume for now. We want quick learning in rapid cycles. So really enthusiastically saying, what can we learn from this situation that we're in? Helping people create an outward orientation. So not letting people get really sunk into being unhappy or being emotional, but get them focused on a task, right? Get them focused on something beyond themselves. Sharing risk. And I've been just so impressed with the leadership just up and down in Ukraine, at the way the whole country has united in sharing this risk. And finally, trust. How do we build trust? That we have the confidence that we can move forward. So back again to this metaphor of the map, right? It wasn't just that the map existed, it is that they were able as leaders to say, okay, this is going to be how we get ourselves to the next stage. And trusting that small group, which I think is phenomenal. Then what I'd like to do next is really stop the formal presentation and have a bit of a discussion. So a couple of key points that I've hoped to make. The first one is that strategy exists to provide focus and direction, and that it allows you to prioritize. It allows you to move. It allows you to take action rather than being kind of frozen. I think we're in a situation where we need to question many of our assumptions, and I'm happy to send over an article which talks about that, just in terms of what are the things we need to perhaps relearn as the world changes around us. We need to be dynamically oriented so that we're oriented toward change, we're oriented toward momentum, learning quickly, fast, as we go, and then sharing that learning as broadly as we can, focusing people on something other than themselves, on some goal or some activity that gets them beyond. And finally, I think great leaders really absorb, and it's not easy. It's not an easy job. So I hope I've convinced you a little bit that strategy, even in highly uncertain times, is still worth having.
Well, thank you, Rita, for introduction. I hope we will get a lot of questions. Friends, please, we don't have much time. We have another like 40 minutes. So I know usually we get a lot of questions in last 5 minutes, but yeah. So maybe for now, I will take a couple of mine, which, while hearing, I was thinking, well, these assumptions, it really resonated because I think the whole country and everyone in the country, and no matter if you are within the country or outside of the country right now, even we all live on the assumptions. We all hope that it will stop soon. We all hope that we will go to work. We understand that the normality will be different for Ukraine, but still we make assumptions. So having the assumptions, what's the shortest term there can be strategy? Because, people were often saying for us in previous life, because we divide now life before war and life in war. So somebody would say, okay, this is not a strategy because this is just for a year or months. This is too operative, too tactical. But sometimes I think now for us, strategy is having more or less plan what we're going to do tomorrow, or I think in some way we even stop to think we think in days. We stop to think probably in weeks and months, maybe like half a year. And then many Ukrainians also, especially in academia or connected to business, we start to think in years now, because, we will have to rebuild Ukraine. So how to combine this strategy with assumptions, with one day thinking and years thinking, and what can we take the most out of that?
Well, and I think that's part of the skill of it, right? Which is saying, if this is our big goal, and let me paint a picture of what that might look like, right? You clearly are moving towards a democracy with the rule of law, with, structured financial interactions with business that can be done on the basis of commonly accepted standards, much less corruption. There's a lot of aspects to this future that I know you've been working very hard to try to make real. But then you work backward to, okay, what must be true for that to happen, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to guide your thinking about the next hour, the next day, the next year. So just to take as an example, the commitment to that future vision, well, maybe today that looks like giving up my desk at my office and taking up arms to try to bring that to be. I can't remember whether it was you or someone else who sent me this wonderful analogy of the bees. That beehives operate on a very distributed leadership model, and nobody needs to be told what to do, because they all kind of communicate with each other about what's important, what's next, and so forth. And I actually had on one of my programs a beekeeper who said, bees communicate with each other through motion and through the way that they dance. And each bee kind of knows what the big objective is, which is the health and development of the hive, but each one has a little part to play in it. So I think as you think about the decisions you make every day, right, there are certain decisions that aren't consistent with that bigger picture, that vision really, that I think we all wish for Ukraine's future. And so it then just work backward, and that's how it can connect the very short term, what's happening today, with that long term, perhaps 5 years, perhaps 10 years, but that longer term goal that you'd like to see happen.
So people who are in business should not forget how their business can and should help the country, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, business, capitalism, as we've learned, I mean, this is not something that was obvious to everyone all the time, but capitalism is a, properly structured, is a wonderful method for increasing wealth, increasing well-being, allowing more people to participate in a thriving economy. And of course, businesses are right at the center of what makes capitalism work.
Yeah. So another reflection which I got from what you have mentioned is what not to do. And this is something what is always used in the classroom and what is always told during the strategic sessions, that's maybe more important question than what to do, but it's always very, very hard to make this decision. So can this situation, can this radical situation of war make us much more decisive on those things? And can it push us to be more clear? So where we should focus as a country, as businesses, and also as individuals?
I think so. I think so. A crisis like this has the galvanizing effect of, making you ask what's really important. And a lot of things we should be saying no to are things that fundamentally aren't all that important. They're distractions. And so one thing that a really existential crisis really forces you to do is say, in this moment, what are the most significant things to me? So the health of my children, the well-being of those around me, my community, and a lot of other stuff that isn't directly related to those things. We can do later, not do it all, get around to it. They're not really critical. So the kinds of questions I would ask is, how strategic is this particular moment that I could use my time, and to what extent is it urgent or not? And if it's strategic and it's urgent, that should be at the top of the priority. If it's strategic but somewhat longer term, to me that comes next. And obviously, if it's not strategic, more operational, let's see if there's some way we can get that stuff handled, but not necessarily that's something you have to do or I have to do, but perhaps it can be delegated, perhaps it can be outsourced. So I think having some clarity about what things are really on the strategic roadmap versus not is very important.
We start to get some questions, but I will ask my last question. So do you think the world can learn something from us today?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And what is it? Because maybe we don't see that yet.
Yeah. Well, I think the world has been absolutely stunned at the courage, the resilience, the commitment to each other that we've seen. We've just seen heartbreaking, but also beautiful images of people helping each other, of people reaching out, of people connecting with their humanity. I think that's a very strong impression that has come from Ukraine. I think the other thing that perhaps has surprised people is how much the West, however you want to describe that, had taken for granted that peace was the norm, or that peace is the norm. And we kind of were not willing to believe that a power that does not believe peace is the norm, that believes that war is just one more tool in a diplomatic toolkit, right? Or that war is very instrumental. I think we were just unwilling to acknowledge that force exists in the world. And I don't think that's a lesson anyone in our generation is ever going to unlearn after seeing what's happened.
Okay, now I will start taking the questions from the chat, and I will start maybe from Ola Heros. She's our graduate from HR program. What would be your advice for leaders nowadays, what they can do to be able to build their resilience and help others? So again, we are talking about leaders in very extreme situation, but the expectations from your team are even higher to you. So how can we survive?
Well, I think as leaders, and remember, I said one of the most important things leaders can do is absorb uncertainty for other people. And the downside of that is you have to bear it then, right? The uncertainty stays with you. So what we've learned over many years is that the practices of bringing down your own emotional temperature, so being mindful, being quiet, taking a few minutes to reflect regularly, physically slowing down your breathing, slowing down your activity is very helpful in not like increasing the emotional resonance. Another metaphor that I like a lot was developed by a couple of Harvard professors who talked about leadership on the line. And they talk about leadership being dangerous. Leaders by definition are causing people to have to do things they wouldn't do other than being led. And they have a metaphor that I think is very helpful. They talk about the balcony versus the dance floor. And that if you imagine going into a dance in the before times, and you were listening to music and watching people, you'd see sort of what was going on at a very, very granular level. But to really see the whole pattern, you've got to get yourself up to the balcony. And if you were up there, what you'd see is certain groups of people moving about when certain kinds of music were played. You'd see people who talk to each other. You'd see people who don't. But then if you're going to take that knowledge and do something with it, you have to go back down to the dance floor and begin to exert influence. And I think so too with leaders. And this is taught in many of the military academies. It's that ability in the heat of a crisis to mentally step back and say, what am I really thinking here? What am I really feeling here? Almost step outside yourself almost to say, I observe that Rita's talking, why is she doing that, right? And so it can give you a bit of a perspective that gets you out of this very emotional state. And I think it's hard. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think those are some of the practices that leaders can use.
Yeah, we had yesterday a board meeting of the university, and our president Bishop Boris Gudziak, he said that we should all learn to sleep now. That this is one of the habits which all leaders in Ukraine, no matter what level of leadership and team you have to learn to sleep now. Okay, maybe take some more questions. We have from Yarka Boychuk, CEO of the business school. Should we have some strategies now, like plan A, B, C, as there can be very different stages and outcome of this war, from the best to the worst, or should we just hope for the best? As people, we tend to think about the best.
Yes, of course. It's very easy to get your preferences mixed up with your predictions. That's part of human nature, I think. Well, so Tom Kolditz, who I mentioned earlier, talks about the leader's intent, right? And what he talks about is these four things. So where do I want to be? What does success look like? What are the appropriate methods I'm going to use? What is the progress along the way? And then what risks are acceptable and which are not? And his point is that you don't want excessively detailed plans, right? I think what you want is to be clear on that end state. So if I go back to my opening analogy, what did that little group of scouts on the mountainside want? Well, clearly they wanted to get back to base camp. That was the overriding goal, but they didn't know how. And it wasn't until they found the map and they said, if you think about it, many mountains look sort of the same. I mean, there's a path that you can follow that takes you in a downward direction. And so having the courage to say, okay, this wasn't what we expected. This snowstorm was not what we expected. But if we can follow this path, we're likely to be in a better place than if we stay where we are. So I think what you want is that fairly high level leader's intent. And then in the moment, you're going to have to decide which specific actions make the most sense. With respect to the larger picture, I unfortunately do believe we need to be ready for multiple scenarios, from the most favorable to the least. And I'm not sure the world is ready for that yet. I don't think people have really accepted yet that this could be a lot darker than we've been hoping.
Thank you. So I guess Vlad changed a little bit the view, because there was our participants could not see you. So I think now it's going to be much better and fine. So I will go to the next question from Andriy Goncharuk. In your introduction, you have mentioned sharing risk. Could you please go deep explaining what you mean? For me, it means discussing important decisions with your team and find consensus, and then implement these decisions. However, it takes a lot of time. One of UCU gurus in leadership says that in extreme situations, you as a leader should take the lead and responsibility and make decisions of your own. And I fully agree with him. So Rita, a question to you is what you mean more by shared responsibility and risks, and especially when the time is very extreme, like right now for all of us.
Right. Well, you know the phrase, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. I mean, that has ricocheted all over the world. And that's what I mean by shared risk, which is, we're all in this together in some way, even if we physically can't be together, that we're sharing some element of exposure to what's going on. And when I think, if you think of leaders who separate themselves from the people that are under their command, or from the people that they're trying to lead, they don't allow themselves to be, in any danger, or they say one thing and do another, that breaks down trust. And so I think this notion of shared risk is the idea that you've demonstrated we're all in this together in some way, and that you are as, maybe not as exposed, but that you're willing to bear the same things you're asking other people to bear. I think that's really the core of it, which is you're not making an exception for yourself.
Maybe I continue with the next question regarding the leadership. Is a peacetime leader the same person as a wartime leader?
Well, Tom would tell you no. Tom Kolditz, my colleague, he would say no. People will put up, he will tell you, with terrible, horrible, toxic leadership when things are going well. That it's very possible for really horrible leaders to achieve success. In wartime, that's when you're looking for competence, you're looking for quiet, you're looking for humility, you're looking for the ability to get out of the situation and perhaps bring a little humor to it, bring a little humanity to it. And those leaders who are not seen as sharing the burden, or not seen as really having a bit of the solution, are going to lose the trust of the people that they're working with. So he would argue that peacetime and wartime are two very different things. Now, something interesting, though, is he said, peacetime is when you prepare. Peacetime is when you lay the foundation for the challenges that are going to be placed on your leadership later on. And he gives an example. He said, when anyone in his command had a baby, he made it a point to, either that person or that person's spouse, he made it a point to visit the hospital the day after. And usually it was fine, there was nothing wrong. But he said, the fact that I did that meant that they knew if something had been going wrong, I would have been there to intervene. And that trust, that's built up in peaceful times, and it gets used in times that are not peaceful.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that we moved a little bit to leadership topic, rather than about strategy. Obviously, they are linked very much together, and but there are a couple of questions which are more related again to risks and opportunities. For example, from Olena Kuzmichova, she's our accredited of Executive MBA. She's writing, high risk and high opportunity are coming together, even right now. How to be up to date from day to day in such dramatic, everyday changes in order not to lose all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's again back to this idea that you want to be strategically consistent, but tactically agile. So, some specific suggestions are think about creating connections with people who are looking to achieve similar goals. And in an ideal world, people with different abilities. So perhaps I've got someone with a marketing background who sees the world one way, perhaps someone with an operations background who sees the world a different way. And you get those different perspectives to look at that situation. And that's when you can start to really make more sense of it, I think. But don't try to do it alone would be my advice, because you're, especially under stress, we tend to just see one aspect of the situation. What you want is to try to get a broader perspective.
So communicating with others is important now. Actually, about stress and about other things, there's a good question from Tatiana Holobieva. She's from our alumni from our technology management program. To be constantly ready for change is opposite for quality of a lot of people to move to a stable state. And actually, a lot of systems move to stability. Otherwise, there is a risk of system to be destroyed. Are we ready psychologically as humans to deal with constant changes and have normal life at the same time and not to be stressed constantly?
Well, there's been some research which shows that when you are in a situation where you're adapting continually to small changes, so not big changes like what you're going through now, but small changes, that humans actually get better at it, that we start to anticipate it more, that we calibrate it into, okay, this is not strange. Where we don't tend to do well is when there's a big abrupt change. That tends to throw things into more chaos than we might perhaps want. So be thinking of building that muscle almost, of being able to assimilate change. There's a wonderful phrase that one of my colleagues in the military uses. He said, I know you don't like change, but you're going to like irrelevance a lot less. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at change. The other thing I would say is, human beings are remarkably adaptive, remarkably ingenious. So I'll give an example from a recent conversation I had with Christopher Mims, who is the technology columnist for one of our large papers here, the Wall Street Journal. And he's talking about robotics. And he said there's a college campus where they've installed this system where these little blue robots on wheels sort of maneuver their way around the campus, delivering food and picking up papers. And of course, when these robots are first introduced, everyone is very surprised. And what are these things doing and how do we understand them? But after about 2 weeks, the students are just stepping over them. They're moving them to the side. They're picking them up and putting them back on the path. I mean, in other words, they've now completely integrated this very new, very uncertain technology into their daily lives in a matter of 2 weeks. So I think we sometimes underestimate just how well human beings cope with new things. We incorporate them very quickly into our understanding.
Okay, we have one more question about strategy from Alina. What is the main difference between strategy in normal situation and now?
Well, the complete lack of being able to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, I think, is a really difficult situation for strategy. So you're being thrown right over onto the far, far edges of uncertainty. And what that means is you have to strategize for as long as you can predict. And that may be hours, it might be days, but I think it sort of forces the timeline to become shorter, and it puts that premium on rapid learning with others. So, in a normal, stable situation, you can plan sometimes for a couple of years. Obviously, that's not possible right now. So the premium is on getting as much information as fast as possible.
Okay, now, if possible, I would like to change a little bit maybe the subject and talk a little bit with you with those global trends, which or assumptions which you have mentioned, by the way, and which were very nicely described in your article, in your blog recently, that now a lot of things globally are changing because of because of war in Ukraine, and it will influence business. So indeed, my first question would be regarding the position which companies had to took or did not take regarding war in Ukraine and their operations in Russia. From your experience, how do you see it? Is it something typical for the world? Is it something which happened? Is it something which happened for the first time?
So let's start with the assumption that underlay a lot of current multinationals' involvement in Russia. So if you go all the way back to the Berlin Wall falling, the dissolution of the Soviet Union as it was, there was this prevailing idea, which was popularized, I would say, toward the end of the 90s, that globalization was inevitable, that globalization was unidirectional. In other words, once you'd started to globalize, you would continue to do so. And that the most attractive places to invest were the so-called BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And then later they added South Africa to become BRICS. And this was very popular. Goldman Sachs made this popular. There was BRICS fund set up. And I think the fundamental assumption was that globalization would be good and that it would continue and that there would be no reversing of course. And what I would argue is that that is an assumption that I think many companies are now really having to rethink. And so we're beginning to see the war clearly, but also the disruptions in global supply chains. The fact that an environmental disturbance 6,000 miles away can mean that you're not getting deliveries of flowers or fruit or something today. And, I think we're having to really say, are we placing our faith on the right sort of long-term trend? And so you're starting to see companies reevaluate all that. Does it make more sense to reshore manufacturing, or do we really want to be dependent on China for so much of our manual production? Would it perhaps not be better to keep work closer to where the products and services need to be sold? So from the perspective of assumptions, I think we are perhaps seeing, and it was happening already, but I think the war has brought it much more to people's attention, that there are weaknesses in that model. And in fact, the BRIC fund that Goldman started got shut down in 2015. Brazil continues to be problematic. And of course, Russia now is basically cutting itself off from all those kinds of economic ties. So we're really having to question that sort of the world is going to be ever more global hypothesis.
But is it enough discussed in the boards of the companies? That that sometimes short-term outcomes are much more prevailing the long-term thinking, and is there a wish or understanding that there should be switch in this direction? Because again, having the contract for 5 years and targets and KPIs for 1 or 2 or 3 years, they are driving executives in certain direction, as well as their wish to make shareholders happy. Do we become a case from which executives and board members can learn and change their thinking?
I believe so. I believe boards have really reneged on a lot of their responsibilities. And if you'd been talking to me a month ago, I would have been up on a proverbial soapbox talking about how they don't put enough emphasis on innovation, for example. But I think we're also seeing a lack of board level oversight on how is my company going to behave in the world? You know, what do we stand for? And that's starting to change. You know, a year ago, I would have been much more pessimistic, but in the last week, I've probably talked to C-level executives at maybe 6 companies who are desperately trying to figure out how to get their people out of Russia, unwind their contracts, figure out, you know, what's ethical to do in that situation. And these are not decisions that are made because it's going to be good for their economic quarter. You know, these are decisions that they're making because perhaps they're beginning to realize that, you know, a system run by kleptocrats in which the rule of law does not apply is not very good for business either.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions, colleagues, friends? I always have questions. So maybe one more question regarding the innovations, and this is, I think it relates a lot with the question of Olena, you know, about opportunities. Mm-hmm. So how much do we have to think about innovation right now? I know that a lot of Ukrainians, we became very entrepreneurial in our behavior at the moment, just because we have to be entrepreneurial. But how much this innovation and focus on innovation should still be in our minds right now, but also especially when we think about long term for Ukraine, because again, I would like, you know, to focus our whole group not only on today for today, how we operate, but also how we think today for longer term, for tomorrow, and for when we will be rebuilding Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that spirit of optimism. So here's what I'd like to draw on is the work of a physicist and author called Safi Bahcall, who wrote a fabulous book called Loonshots. And the core thesis of the book is that many innovations begin, you know, not as these big ideas, right? They begin because someone has a hunch or a hypothesis. They cobble together resources to try to test that out. So things like radar, things like mRNA vaccines, things like the whole digital technologies, you know, transistors and so forth. They all began because someone had a hunch that something could be done differently or better. And that in the beginning, this often flies in the face of orthodoxy. So what we have is this fascinating schizophrenic situation where to create these new innovations, you need slack resources, you need time, you need the ability of small groups of people to get together and tinker almost and work on things, but that to become mainstream, really transformative innovations, now you need to go from these small, playful almost groups to, you know, kind of armies marching. And that one of the roles that is underrepresented is the role of that person who helps carry the translation from one to the other. And Safi uses the example of Vannevar Bush, who was the chief science officer in the US situation for many years. And one of the things he did was that bridging, you know, seeing the opportunities in the brand new space, but then translating it and bridging it to the larger groups that are necessary to make these things a reality. So here's a quick example of how he did that. One of the things that the Allies were trying to do in World War II was use radar to shoot down enemy planes. And the technology was fine. There was nothing wrong with it, but they realized that the pilots weren't using this radar, even though they could. And so what he asked was some of the people in the science area, the scientists, to go on the airplanes and see what was happening. And what they realized was it wasn't that the radar didn't work. It was that in the heat of the battle, that the interface, the user interface was insufficiently easy. It involved dialing a lot of knobs and flippers and stuff. And so the scientists looked at that and I said, oh, so what we need to change is the user interface. And what they came up with was this, I forget what the technology is called now, but it's like a level. And you can just make very minor adjustments to the level, and it's much easier to use. So without that pair of thoughts looking at that problem, what might have been a core piece of the Allied victory might never have been discovered. And so that's, I think, the relationship you want to have between those two things. And it's hard because the tinkering new stuff that'll be coming up every day, you're going to be learning things every day because so much of what was normal has now been thoroughly disrupted. But then the ability to bring it into mass use is what requires that translation. So that's what I'd encourage you to think about. It's almost like Safi uses the example of ice and water and keeping your organization at what he calls 32 degrees Fahrenheit, just at the freezing point, 0 degrees centigrade, just at the freezing point, so that the right person can move it one way or another at the right time.
Thank you. There are a lot of thank you in the chat to the questions which you have answered already. There is really nice question, and I think since we're approaching the end of our conversation, it's just beautiful. Rita, thank you. It's from Anton Shulik. How Ukrainian business should plan and act so we don't lose the speed of global development? Where in the next wave of opportunities we should expect for our business?
I think that's a wonderful question. I think you want to work at perhaps 3 levels. So the first is, don't lose this memory of how, in many ways, how well we worked, what a community we created, what a sense of solidarity that we had. At the same time, not falling back into the way things once were and keeping the lessons of today. I think the second thing that I would think about is, there are many, many millions of people all over the world who will be ready to help. And I think will be very committed to helping when they can. And that's something I would encourage you to capitalize on. So think about those networks, think about the reach that you will have, and don't be afraid to accept help. I think that's the second thing I would think about. And the third thing is, any disruption brings opportunities. So make sure that you leave some slack resources. Don't just pour everything into growth or rebuilding. Make sure you leave a little bit of resource to do some experimentation, to do some of that testing, so that the opportunities don't just go unnoticed. Those would be some the pieces of advice that I would have.
That's interesting, because most of people who are here are very self-sufficient, and it's a new learning for us to accept help and to accept support. So maybe we have 8 more minutes. Maybe you would like somehow, I don't know, to wrap up, what we have talked about, and yeah.
So I think the first big idea that I was asked to think about is, well, what good does strategy do, in a situation which is just so uncertain and unprecedented? And my argument would be that it orients you, it gives you a direction, it helps find a path, and it promotes action, right? That a good map promotes action. You can take some steps toward the next destination. That then connects to what kind of leadership is needed in these highly extreme situations. And unlike in the movies, what we need is the kind of leadership that lowers the emotional temperature, that provides confidence that people can follow with trust, that allows people to feel that they are in a common situation together, and that's how the strategy gets sort of going. It's how it gains momentum. And then I think for the business people among us, this new way of thinking about strategy, which is much less about creating, a defensible moat, right? We talk in strategy about the idea of sustainable competitive advantage. And I think what this experience perhaps teaches us all is that more and more we have to think about innovation, which is where new advantages come from. But we also need to think about transformation. What do we need to let go of that's no longer relevant to the future strategy that we wish to pursue? For myself personally, I would love to be helpful. If there's something I can do, a reference or some way we could help. And I know I speak for my colleagues at Columbia as well. Our thoughts are very much with you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I will add in the end a couple of very important things for Ukraine. For us as Ukrainians, I think we all believe very much in our victory. We just don't know when it will happen and how much it will cost us. But I also think it's very important for us that the whole world and the whole society understands that we are standing not only for our own country, but that we are standing for the whole world. And as long as people in Ukraine suffer, and we hope that we just don't become numbers to people in the whole West or world, if as you have mentioned, and that actions are important. The support is very important, and in a way, we hope that our standing and our position will help to keep the values which were proclaimed and which were kind of lived in Western society, because in some way we are a shield for these values right now. And that they are not taken for granted. I was at one of the meetings recently, and one entrepreneur who participated, he said very well that Western countries often calculate what happens if we have the World War III, when the clash happens. But indeed, we don't know if somebody calculated what happens when Ukraine disappears, if we lose. And I think if this other side of calculation is made, and when it's done as an assumption as well, then the strategy might be also different. And that relates to what we talk about today. So thank you very much, Rita, for your contribution. Thank you for very, how to say it, a constructive discussion. I hope it also gives to our participants, alumni, some kind of feeling of where we have to go. We know the global direction, but also each one of us has a small avenue, and we have to defend this avenue, and we have to defend our economy, and we have to defend our business as well. And that will be our contribution to the victory. Thank you everyone who participated, and thank you to Rita for your contribution.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of your world.